Scourge hegemony patrol ship, Vigilance, sliced through the dead black of the Perseus arm. For 3 weeks its crew had seen nothing but the ghosts of long-dead stars. This was the frontier, the ragged edge of the hegemony's 1,000-year conquest, a place where glory was a forgotten memory and boredom was the apex predator. On the bridge, Sub-Commander Jax felt the familiar lull of deep space patrol settling in his bones. He was watching the sensor returns paint a canvas of absolute nothing when a junior officer, his carapace still soft with youth, broke the silence. "Commander, I have an unregistered contact." Jax's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a slow ripple of disbelief. "Unregistered, out here. Clean the sensors and run the sweep again, Ensign. You're chasing radiation phantoms." "Sir, I've run it 3 times, the ensign insisted, his voice tight with a nervousness that bordered on fear. "The object is there, and it's silent." Jax moved to the sensor station. On the tactical display was a single, stark icon. It was small, no bigger than a patrol cutter. Its shape was a smooth, severe wedge, devoid of the jagged, weaponized architecture favored by the hegemony. But the terrifying part was the data, or lack thereof. No heat signature, no energy output, no drive emissions. It was a hole in the universe. A piece of the void that had decided to move. "Hail it," Jax commanded, his voice now stripped of its earlier boredom. "No response, Commander. Targeting lock. Full scan." "Trying, sir. But there's nothing to lock onto. It's like it's not really there." The silent shape drifted, its course casual, almost lazy, as if it were utterly unaware of the warship watching it. It was an insult, a violation of the natural order. Everything in the void either fought, fled, or died. This thing simply was. "Bring us about," Jax snarled. "Power main weapons. I don't care what it is. Nothing remains in hegemony space without our permission." As the Vigilance turned, its massive weapon ports sliding open, the impossible happened. The icon on the screen didn't jump to hyperspace. It didn't accelerate. It didn't cloak. It simply ceased to be. One moment, it was there, a chilling mystery in the dark. The next, it was gone. The sensors showed only the empty vacuum it had occupied. The bridge was tomb silent. The young ensign was visibly shaking. Jax stared at the screen, a cold dread seeping into him, a feeling he hadn't known since he was a hatchling. His official report would state the encounter was an anomaly, a sensor, ghost caused by uncharted gravitational lensing. But for the rest of his career, and for the handful of crews who would whisper the tale in darkened mess halls near the frontier, the story of the silent ghost would be a chilling reminder that the void was not as empty as they believed. Months later, the story of the Vigilance was less than a whisper, a forgotten ghost story buried under the relentless march of the hegemony. In the planet-spanning capital city of Kor, Imperator Vorlag the Unbroken sat upon the obsidian throne, a monument carved from the heart of a dead moon. Around him, the grand chamber glittered with the plundered glory of 1,000 worlds. Banners depicting the hegemony's triumphs hung from vaulted ceilings that stretched miles into the artificial sky. Before him shimmered the holographic image of a new world, a primitive blue marble teeming with a bipedal species they called humans. They were the hegemony's next conquest, another trivial step in a destiny forged eons ago when their ancestors had risen up and cast down the so-called old gods, the previous rulers of the galaxy. That victory, Vorlag believed, had earned them the divine right to rule, to bring all lesser species into the fold. He gestured with a clawed hand, and his voice, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, boomed with the weight of absolute power. "Deliver the ultimatum," a communications minister bowed low. At once, Imperator. The message was transmitted across the void, a declaration of inevitable fate. To the inhabitants of the world Earth, You have been deemed worthy of assimilation into the Scourge hegemony. You will surrender your worlds, your technology, and your species' sovereignty. This is not a negotiation. It is a statement of fact. Respond with your acknowledgement of fealty. The court waited. For a species facing the hegemony for the first time, there were usually stages: panic, disbelief, desperate attempts at negotiation. But from the humans, there was only a brief silence. Then, a single, sterile message returned, displayed on the main screen in the hegemony's own script. It was one word: acknowledged. A ripple of confused, then contemptuous laughter spread through. The court, acknowledged, a warlord chittered. Not we surrender, not we beg for mercy, just acknowledged. Imperator Vorlag smiled, a terrifying sight of clicking mandibles. It is the dumb silence of cattle before the slaughter. They comprehend their doom, but lack the capacity to articulate it. So be it. He turned his gaze to the holographic form of his most trusted commander, who knelt in the command center of the flagship Worldbreaker. Grand Admiral Khitan, you have your orders. The Annihilation Fleet will proceed. Let us bring these quiet primitives into the light of our glory. The Admiral bowed. For the hegemony, Imperator. As the transmission ended, Vorlag settled back onto his throne. The conquest of Earth would be swift, a footnote in the glorious history of the Scourge. He gave the silent, impertinent little world no further thought. Aboard the Worldbreaker, a vessel so vast it was a city unto itself. Grand Admiral Khitan watched his Annihilation Fleet slice through the void. 50,000 warships, the collected might of the hegemony, moved in a perfect, crystalline formation that was both beautiful and terrifying. The conquest of this primitive Earth would be his 50th victory, a capstone to a glorious career. Then it appeared, a single contact, emerging from the black. It was small, silent, and wedge-shaped. Khitan felt a faint, unwelcome memory surface. The dismissed report of the silent ghost from the Perseus Arm Patrol. A flicker of unease, which he immediately crushed with the certainty of his own power. Is that their champion? His sub-commander chuckled. Have they sent their single best ship to face us? Target the vessel, Khitan commanded, his voice flat. Eradicate it. The fleet's forward batteries turned as one, preparing to unleash enough energy to crack a continent. But before they could fire, the human ship moved. It accelerated directly toward them, a suicidal charge against impossible odds. And then the universe broke. The human ship fired no weapons. Instead, a shimmer emanated from its prow, a barely visible distortion that warped the starlight behind. It was not an explosion. It was not an energy wave. It was a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. The ripple touched the forward screen of Khitan's fleet. On the tactical display, 1,000 icons, 1,000 warships crewed by millions of his soldiers, did not explode. They did not turn red to signify damage. They simply vanished. The bridge comms erupted, not with screams of pain, but with the shrieks of minds shattering against paradox. The first spearhead is gone. Gone where? There was no fire, no debris. My sensors show nothing, Admiral. It's as if they were never there. Khitan stared, his mandibles frozen agape. This was not warfare. This was pest control, a quiet, clean, incomprehensible erasure. The human ship, the messenger, continued its serene, silent path, and with every foot it traveled, another section of his fleet was unwritten from existence. He tried to issue an order, to retreat, to attack, to do anything, but his voice caught in his throat. What command do you give when the enemy is reality itself? The ripple reached the Worldbreaker. Khitan felt a strange, cold, tingling sensation, not of pain, but of cancellation. He looked down at his own hand, and for a fraction of a second, he could see the stars through it. His existence was becoming a lie. His last sensation was one of profound, cosmically vast insignificance. Far away, at a deep space listening post on the edge of hegemony territory, a lone technician monitoring the Annihilation Fleet's progress, saw the 50,000 friendly icons on his screen vanish in a single silent instant. The channel, which should have been filled with victory reports, broadcast only static, and then, cutting through the hiss, came one final, digitally perfect transmission from the void where the fleet had been. Acknowledged. The silence in the grand throne room on Core was a physical weight. Laughter and contempt had been replaced by a dread so profound it felt like the planet's gravity had doubled. The warlords and ministers who had mocked the humans' simple reply now stood frozen, their carapaces dull, their antennae drooping. Imperator Vorlag the Unbroken sat on his obsidian throne, no longer looking like a god, but like a statue of one moments before it is shattered. Before him, a trembling minister replayed the final report from the deep space listening post for the 10th time. "There is nothing else, Imperator," the minister stammered. "The Annihilation Fleet, all 50,000 ships, they have ceased to exist. Our long-range observatories have confirmed it. There is no debris field, no radiation signature, no wreckage. The space they occupied is clean." "Impossible," Vorlag roared, the sound echoing a desperate denial rather than a command. "No weapon can do that. Where are the battle logs? The distress calls?" "There were none," a strategist whispered, his voice hoarse. "There was only their final transmission. The one word. Acknowledged." The word hung in the chamber, no longer a sign of primitive submission, but a chilling confirmation of sentence passed and executed. In the suffocating silence, a junior archivist, desperate for any explanation, dared to step forward. "Imperator, there was a report, months ago, from the patrol ship Vigilance in the Perseus Arm. The old, dismissed report flashed onto the main screen, an encounter with a small, silent, wedge-shaped vessel that had vanished in a way that defied physics. The silent ghost." The court stared at the image of the ship from the report, then at the single, grainy image of the vessel that had faced the Annihilation Fleet. They were the same. The legend had returned, not as a ghost, but as a judge. Imperator Vorlag felt the foundations of his 1,000-year-old empire crack beneath him. The prelude to his greatest, most humiliating defeat had not been a grand challenge or a declaration of war, but a minor patrol report he had dismissed as a sensor glitch. The fear that gripped the hegemony lasted for 3 days. Then, a new message arrived. It was broadcast on a priority channel, hijacking every display on Core. There was no image, only stark, simple text. "One ship was enough. Do not make us send another." Beneath the text was a set of coordinates, pointing to a desolate, empty patch of the void on their farthest border. The message shattered the fear and replaced it with incandescent rage. The silence in the throne room was broken as the warlords, who had been cowed into submission, found their voices again. "An insult," snarled one, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming. "They mock us. They name a place and dare us to meet them. We cannot allow this to stand," another bellowed. "The hegemony does not bow to threats from primitives. Our honor demands a response." The strategists pleaded for caution. "Imperator, we do not understand their weapon. To send another fleet is madness until we know what we are facing." But their logic was a whisper against the roaring fire of wounded pride. Imperator Vorlag, the Unbroken, stood from his throne, his decision made. He could not be seen as a coward. The hegemony's power was built on a foundation of absolute, unquestioned military dominance. To ignore this challenge would be to admit that foundation was dust. "We will not send another Annihilation Fleet," Vorlag declared, his voice cutting through the clamor. "This is not a conquest. It is a punishment." He summoned the image of his most ruthless commander, Admiral Valerius, a veteran known for his cruel efficiency. "Admiral," the Imperator commanded, "you will take the first punitive expedition. 1,000 of our finest warships. Your mission is not to destroy this human vessel, but to capture it. I want its secrets, its technology, its crew. If capture is impossible, he paused, bring me its wreckage. The hegemony will learn how they accomplished this, and then we will return the lesson 1,000-fold. Admiral Valerius, his face a mask of brutal confidence, bowed low. It will be done, Imperator. The shame of Khitan will be cleansed in the fires of our victory. And so, the 1,000-ship fleet, the very best of the hegemony's navy, departed for the designated coordinates. They went not to conquer, but to reclaim their pride, flying blindly into an abyss that had already consumed 50,000 of their brethren. Admiral Valerius stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Retribution, and surveyed the empty void displayed on his main screen. They had arrived at the coordinates. As expected, there was nothing. They thought to scare us with shadows, Valerius sneered to his bridge crew. A pathetic psychological ploy. Begin full-spectrum scans. Find their hiding place. I will drag this messenger back to core in chains. The fleet spread out, a net, of 1,000 warships designed to catch one insignificant gnat. But as the minutes ticked by, an unnerving stillness settled over the bridge. A low hum that wasn't part of the ship's normal function vibrated through the deck plates. The lights flickered. Report! Valerius snapped at his engineering officer. Minor power fluctuations, Admiral, the officer replied, his voice uncertain. No known cause. A cold dread began to permeate the bridge, thick and suffocating. The crew shifted uneasily, their disciplined movements becoming hesitant. They felt it, a presence, the sensation of being watched not by eyes, but by the void itself. Then it came. It was not a ripple in space. It was a ripple in the mind. Every scourge, soldier on every one of the 1,000 ships felt it at the same instant. A cold, ancient, and impossibly vast consciousness brushed against their own. It was not a voice that spoke in their minds, but a concept that bloomed there, fully formed and utterly terrifying. You were warned. Admiral Valerius stumbled back, his ruthless confidence vaporizing into pure, mind-shattering terror. In that one, eternal moment, he understood everything. This was not humanity. This was not some primitive race with a secret weapon. This was a god. They had not been challenged to a battle. They had been summoned to a reckoning. His last thought was not of the hegemony or the imperator or his own shattered pride, but of an insect looking up just as the boot begins to descend. Then, for the second time in as many weeks, a fleet of the scourge hegemony was simply and silently erased from existence. In the throne room on Core, Imperator Vorlag and his court watched the tactical display, a silent vigil of forced confidence. The icons representing Admiral Valerius's 1,000 elite warships held steady at the designated coordinates. They were waiting for the inevitable report of victory. There was no warning, no flicker. In the space between one frantic pulse of Vorlag's heart and the next, all 1,000 icons vanished from the screen. The stunned silence that followed was heavier than a dying star, and then the display, now horrifyingly empty of his fleet, cleared. New text appeared, stark and absolute against the black. Final warning, a collective gasp, a sound of 1,000 proud histories ending at once, echoed through the chamber. The warlords who had bayed for honor and retribution now stood as still as stone, their warrior instincts utterly useless against an enemy that could not be fought. This was not a defeat, it was a judgment, a power so immense that it did not need to fight, only to decide. The scourge hegemony, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, masters of the galaxy, were nothing more than insects beneath an indifferent, cosmic heel. Imperator Vorlag the Unbroken finally broke. A shudder racked his massive frame, and the title he had carried with such pride turned to ash in his mind. He was not unbroken, he was shattered. He looked at his silent court, seeing not advisors and commanders, but fellow prisoners in a cage they had never known existed. With a trembling claw, he gestured to his communications minister. His voice, when it came, was a dry, rasping whisper, stripped of all its former power. Transmit to that empty space, on all frequencies. The minister stared, uncomprehending. My lord? What message? Vorlag's eyes were fixed on the two terrible words still burning on the screen. Tell them, he croaked, the words tasting like poison. Tell them, we do not resist. For what felt like an eternity, the court of the Scourge hegemony waited in absolute terror for their own erasure. They had surrendered to an unseen, unknown power. But what if it didn't accept surrender? Then, the reply came, displayed on the throne room screen with the same chilling finality as all the messages that had preceded it. Acknowledged. The collective exhalation of the court was a weak, shuddering sound. They had been spared, their surrender accepted. Imperator Vorlag, looking 1,000 years older, began issuing commands, his voice a monotone of defeat. Recall the fleets, all of them. Abandon the outer conquests. Fortify the core worlds. All expansion protocols are hereby rescinded, effective immediately, for all time. The great war machine of the Scourge hegemony ground to a halt. The greatest, conquering force the galaxy had ever known turned inward, not for a strategic pause, but for a permanent, fearful retreat. In the decades that followed, the hegemony became a different empire. The aggressive, expansionist culture was replaced by a paranoid, isolationist one. Their mighty warships, once instruments of conquest, now patrolled their own borders like nervous sentinels guarding against a threat they could never hope to fight. A new mythology was born, whispered in hushed tones from the core worlds to the frontier. They spoke of the silent watchers, the true gods of the void, who had punished the hegemony for its hubris, and they spoke of the forbidden cradle, the insignificant soul system, home to the primitive humans. They were not to be contacted, not to be harmed, not to be even observed too closely. They were not feared as a rival power, but revered with a terrifying awe, like the sacred grounds of a vengeful god. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity remained blissfully unaware. They had just launched their first multi-generational colony ships, primitive vessels that would take centuries to reach the nearest stars. They looked out at the cosmos with hope and wonder, entirely oblivious to the fact that the most powerful empire in the galaxy had nearly conquered them, and was now huddled in fear, not of humanity itself, but of the terrifying, silent guardians that watched over their cradle. Decades passed. The Scourge hegemony withered under the weight of its own fear. Imperator Vorlag, now ancient and frail, was haunted by the one question his empire could not answer. Why? The unknown was a poison that had rotted his victory-obsessed culture from the inside out. He could bear it no longer. In secret, he descended deep into the planet's core, to the archives of origin, where the hegemony's most sacred and forbidden histories were kept. He approached a vault sealed with genetic locks that only the Imperator could open, the sanctum of the old gods. For 1,000 years, it had held the records of their defining victory. He had come to see the proof of his people's strength one last time. But when the ancient data core activated, it did not show the glorious battles he expected. Instead, he found a single, isolated log file that did not belong, a file of alien origin that had been lying dormant for eons. Its title was simple: Quarantine Subject, 734, the Vexian Ascendancy, Final Disposition. With a trembling claw, Vorlag opened it. The log was not a history of a war, but the cold, detached report of a cosmic warden. It described the old gods, the Vexians, not as a rival empire, but as a hyper-aggressive culture that had breached a pre-established cosmic boundary. It spoke of their pruning, their discipline, their removal for threatening a protected specimen. And at the end of the report was a final, chilling addendum, a standing order for any who might stumble upon this record. Certain cradles of life are designated as sanctuaries. They are not to be disturbed. They are not yours to challenge. Trespass will be met with correction. Beneath the order was a list of coordinates. The third entry was designated Soul. In that moment, Vorlag understood. The terrible, crushing truth fell upon him like a collapsing mountain. His people had never defeated the old gods. They had merely found their empty shell after the true. Gods of the void had finished their work. The Annihilation Fleet had not been destroyed by humanity. Humanity was just the bait in a trap set across millennia. The Scourge, in their infinite arrogance, had tried to invade a sanctuary, and the silent, patient sentinels who guarded it had swatted them away with less thought than Vorlag would give to crushing a bothersome insect. They were not conquerors. They were not an empire. They were merely noisy children who had thrown a rock at a zookeeper's fence and had been sent to their room for the rest of time. His life, his title, his entire civilization's defining myth. All of it was a lie built on a misunderstanding of their own utter insignificance. Imperator Vorlag the Unbroken, the last ruler of a dead dream, slumped against the data core and finally, completely, shattered.